For those of you that follow me on Instagram, you might have noticed that I was invited at DeepCool's HQ in Netherlands with CES Europe, or so they called it. And there I had the opportunity to actually see this AIO. This right here is the DeepCool's MYSTIQUE 360 AIO, which has an LCD screen on top of the pump block top, and it really is quite nicely designed. I have to say it's not only this part right here, but the software that it's backed up with does wonders, and you have some possibilities to see, let's say, system information that on others you can't, and this is quite cool. I do have to say I'm really loving this AIO right up front. But that's not all, because we have loads of stuff to go through, and we'll definitely go and check everything out that you need to know about MYSTIQUE 360. But let's check out. So first of all, we have some connections. We have 3 fans on top, which are already daisy chained with 4-pin PWM, and you have one sticking out. Of course, they thought of everything. So in terms, if this fan, which is actually connected, lastly, has the quite enough distance to connect to PWM, it's really good and you don't have to use the extender. But if not, if it's too short, then you'll have to use the extender that is already provided in the accessory box, which is really straight, simple. You use female to male, connect it here, and then use female to male on the motherboard and connect it to PWM for your CPU fan, and that's all there is to it. Now the fans are 120 times 120 times 25. RPM goes from 500 to 2150 plus minus 10%. We have fan airflow at 72.45 CFM. Fan air pressure is 4.32 millimeters H2O, and then the fan noise at maximum is less than 36.49 decibels. As already stated, fan connector is 4-pin PWM. We have fluid dynamic bearing, and that's basically it. There's no additional information that you need to have regarding the fans. No RGB, you have DeepCool sticker logo on the middle of the fan, and that's it. So basically you have quite nice flexible tubes. I do have to admit it, they're really flexible, and you have possibility to really reroute them if you have I would say a smaller case, let's put it this way, that actually can accommodate 360, right? But regardless of that, you get 2 Velcro ties which are already attached to the tubes, and it kind of comes that way. It's a bit different package than you're used to. You have already pre-assembled everything, and you have pre-applied thermal paste, but you don't have the brackets on the pump block top because, well, it depends if you're going to use AMD or Intel. And we have what's there left, accessory box, and that's it. That's all there is to it. It's quite straightforward, simple, really no complications. Now, since I was at the connection part, apart from the fans, you do need to connect something else, and that is the pump block top, which has a bit more connections, I would say. So you have SATA power, which goes directly to your power supply, SATA power, to actually get the power for it, right? Then you have a addressable RGB header, which is 3-pin 5 volts, and it's daisy chainable. So if you have some other stuff that are addressable RGB and you don't want to lose those kind of connections on the motherboard, since we are always limited with those, you can connect it to that AIO, basically. Really simple, really straightforward. You just have to find it on your motherboard. Usually it's on the right top side or the bottom left or right. It depends on the motherboard brand and manufacturer and everything else. Then we have 3-pin DC connection for the pump RPM. And you connect that to the pump header on your motherboard, which basically doesn't need that much regulation when we're talking about the speeds, because after all, it is okay for the pump to run at maximum only if it doesn't create too much sound. So if it's not loud, and believe me, this one isn't, because it's running on 3600 RPMs when I was testing it. But since we're at that point, I'm just going to jump into that segment as well. The pump dimensions are 93 times 77 times 66 millimeters, and the pump speed is 3400 RPM. So this is what I mentioned, plus minus 10%. It did show somewhere around 3500, and that's really good. But the pump noise is 21 decibels, and this is what I'm talking about. You don't need to control the RPMs of the pump if it's not that loud. And believe me, this one isn't. First, you're going to hear your fans, and they will definitely overpower the sound of the pump, which kind of in those terms, in that sense, it really doesn't matter the decibel range of the pump. So unless you're running on idle constantly or doing some light work, there's still a possibility that the fans will be louder than the pump. So this is really good. And as I stated, 3-pin DC connection, which is straightforward, right? Then let's talk about next thing. You have it's not a 9-pin connector. It's actually 3-pin to a 9-pin connector, which is actually used to connect the pump block top, so the LCD screen, to your motherboard via USB 2.0 internal header on your motherboard, right? Okay, I'm losing some words and adding some unnecessary ones, but regardless of that, this cable actually benefits you for using the screen with their software that they managed. And it's not like bloatware, definitely isn't, but it's a dedicated app, and it's not like on those digital cases and coolers and even those AIOs that have digital screens. It's not that simple, right? So we're going to break it down definitely and going to check out all the details that you need to know regarding that, so you kind of get more information about it. Now, the socket compatibility goes from, of course, Intel LGA 1700 and everything below that, excluding 20XX, and then we go with AMD, AM5 and AM4. Radiator dimensions are 402 times 120 times 27, so when you take the fans and the radiator into consideration, we have 52 millimeters of thickness. So you don't have to worry about it because it fits in most DeepCool cases. And then we have radiator material, which is aluminum. Tube length is 410 millimeters. We're used to somewhere around from 400 to 450, but 410 is still quite enough for their cases, and you don't have to worry about that whatsoever. And now for the display specifications, we have 2.83 inch 4080 times 640 TFT LCD. Now the cool thing about this LCD is you can rotate it however you wish, in terms of if you have a certain position inside your case and you want to go with it vertically, it still looks great. And even with all those, now we're going into the software segment, right? So even with those additional specifications that you get, like system information on the screen, the orientation, when you orient the display in a proper horizontal way, right, it actually adjusts those system information accordingly, and it still looks great. So it doesn't really matter what position the pump is. You can rotate the screen, adjust it, and you have a gyroscope that it can actually do automatically. So it's really good because even if you don't do it, it will do it automatically if you tick the right box. So since we're at that point, you have a possibility to adjust the screen brightness, which basically if you lower it fully down, it's still nicely visible, but you can always crank it up to the maximum. After that, you have an adjustment for the CPU frequency, voltages, and orientation, of course, as you wish, and you can always turn on the gyroscope so you don't have to worry about that. Then you can, instead of CPU frequency, you can add the time, which also can give you an option to adjust the system information on the side. So the time, CPU frequency, CPU fan RPMs, pump RPMs, and finally CPU temperature, as well as CPU fan and pump fan at the same time. You have additional system information on the side, which honestly, I think it's really good. I have nothing to add. Unfortunately, the background with the thermals isn't possible to adjust, but it looks quite nice and subtle and has those squares in terms of DeepCool, let's say, logo. So yeah, in addition to that, you can go to additional software adjustment when we're talking about the screen. So you can upload an image or a GIF, which basically brings us to the point where you can adjust anything or place anything that you like. And then you have a record possibility. Now this brings us to the point where you could actually place CPU frequency and CPU temperature, where it actually shows a graph throughout some period of time. So it actually says now, and it says -7 minutes. This gives you some indication if you have some certain spikes. Now we went through the connection part, and I do need to mention how it is easy to basically connect the pump block top to your CPU, to your motherboard. The radiator is really straightforward because the placement of the fan is designed that way to place it on top. Of course, you can remove them and revert them to your desired position, but that's all up to you, right? Now I'm using right here the CH560 digital, and even though you don't need a digital screen with this AIO, I just wanted to pair it up with a black case from DeepCool, and that's it. Now the mounting mechanism for the pump. Mounting the pump block top on the AM5 or AM4 basically platform is quite straightforward. You use those four, they're somewhat locking nuts, thumb screws, whatever they're called, and remove the original plastic retention brackets from the AMD motherboard, place those screws, and then you have to place two new retention brackets on the AIO block with 4 additional screws, 2 on each for the retention bracket that is attached to the pump block top. After that, since you have a pre-applied thermal paste, you just place the AIO in the correct orientation depending on the case and everything else, place it on those screws and use 4 locking nuts to tie it up. That's it. After that, you do all the connections that I mentioned earlier in the video. It's really straightforward. There's no complications when we're talking about that, and it looks outstanding. I do have to admit, really does. Really loving the design in general when we're talking about that. Now let's go with the benchmarks, and then I'll just add some more information that you might find interesting. So the benchmarks aren't a shock, but they are really outstanding. So AIDA 64 Extreme Edition with CPU going up to 81 degrees Celsius, clock speed going up to 4850 megahertz, and the GPU inside this case 67 degrees, which I didn't mention, of course, the components. We have AMD Ryzen 9 7900X3D as per usual, so I can do some comparison for you guys. And of course, we have the MSI RTX 4080 Gaming X Trio. Now, Cinebench is what I usually check mostly about. And right here we have constant 82 degrees. We have constant CPU clock speed with 5025 megahertz. And then when we're talking about Cinebench points, it starts at 26,439. And it kind of stays around 26,400. I would say some sort of an average is 26,440, something like that. So it performs outstandingly good. This is the 5th generation pump from DeepCool inside their AIOs, and it does perform quite well. As I said, 34 to 3500 RPMs when we're talking about the pump speed, and this is quite outstanding. I do have to say, when we take everything into consideration, first of all, the DeepCool quality and everything else, as you're used to on my channels to see, and what I've shown you so far. And then we have something new, because they didn't fully move from the digital segment of their AIOs, cases, and CPU tower coolers, because I do have one surprise for you guys quite soon, but you'll see that quite soon. But altogether, how they evolved their products in the past 3 years, from the cases, from the AIOs, from the CPU tower coolers, it's just going in such a positive direction, and I'm really enjoying building and working with everything that they produce. It's outstanding. So yeah, to wrap it up a bit, what I can add more to the whole story, the radiator has also the anti-leak technology, so the internal valve regulates the pressure and will purge it when the internal pressure exceeds atmospheric pressure, which reduces the possibility of leaks. This is outstanding. Then we have the fans, which are FT12SC fans, redesigned and improved cold plate, which has a really nice huge cover. I do have to admit that. The pump is 3-phase, 6-slot, 4-pole motor. Deep Creative, the control center, has 3 display options, monitoring media and recording. I mean, the last specs are just something in addition to say what kind of AIO this is. So yeah, all in all, quite satisfied again with the DeepCool product, and I do have to give it a PC Crazy approved badge, no doubt about it. The link for the DeepCool MYSTIQUE 360 is in the description below, and of course I'll place the CH560 regular. You don't need a digital one, you can just place a regular one, and I think that would look quite cool. So yeah, both products are in the description below, so you can check out the prices and everything else. And if you're new to the channel and this kind of explained a bit more about the Mystique 360, gave you some insights about the connections, how to connect everything, how to mount the block on your AMD processor, and of course some performance. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, and click the notification bell. And well, of course, hopefully I will see you very soon. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.